Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Pinetop-Lakeside Town Council to order. We do have a quorum. Welcome, everybody. I'd just like to remind everybody to silence your cell phone, please. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pastor Diane?
Thank you. If you're inclined, please bow your heads in prayer with me. God, Creator, Great Spirit, the one called by numerous names, we come before you this evening and we give you thanksgiving for so many things, including our freedom to meet here, to listen and to be heard, for the moisture that has nourished our dry land, for the many city workers who keep our cities running, and for the first responders who keep our cities safe. Would you bestow upon all of these persons blessing, peace, protection, and wisdom as they engage in their duties? We also give you thanks for those council members who sit before us tonight. As they give of their time and energy in service to all citizens in Pinetop and Lakeside, would you increase that time and fill their cups when their energy runs low? And as the council considers the issues before them this evening, give them unity and discernment so that they would be of one mind. We ask that your peace would reign throughout tonight's meeting and throughout our fine cities in all of the days to come. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Diane. Item B is call to the public. This is a business meeting of the Town Council. The town values and welcomes public input. Please address the council as a whole and not individual council members. Do not address staff or members of the audience. Council action on items brought up and called to the public is limited by the open meeting law. Council may direct staff to study the matter and reschedule for further consideration at a later date. Items on the agenda will not be heard during call to the public, and individuals are limited to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody that wants to address us tonight? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to item C, which is our consent agenda. All items listed are considered routine matters and will be enacted by one motion of the council. There will be no separate discussion unless a member of the council requests that an item or items be removed for discussion. Council members may ask questions without approval of the items from the consent agenda. Items removed are considered in their normal sequence. We have two items tonight, minutes from a couple of meetings. Is there any discussion? Vice Mayor?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Thank you. That carries unanimously. We'll move on then to item D, which is business before the council. Public comment will be taken at the beginning of each agenda item after the subject has been announced by the mayor and explained by staff. Any citizen who wishes may speak one time for 5 minutes on each agenda item, either before or after council discussion. Questions from council members, however, may be directed to staff or a member of the public through the mayor at any time. Item D1 tonight is a presentation of the EPA Brownfield grant awarded to Navajo and Apache County communities. Dave Laney, come on up.
Thank you, Mayor Irwin. All right. So what I would like to talk to the council about today is what we call the Northeast Arizona Property and Business Revitalization Program. What I would like to do is give you an overview of what this program is, talk about what kinds of activities are eligible for funding with the grant that funds this program, give you some information about how grants like this have been used successfully in Arizona in the past, and then see if anyone has any questions. This is an effort by communities in Navajo and Apache County to identify, plan for, and provide funding and technical assistance to property owners who wish to reuse and or revitalize and redevelop property. The emphasis is on vacant, underutilized, abandoned, and in some cases, contaminated property. The goal is to select property that can improve economic development and encourage future growth in the cities that are part of this coalition. Speaking of that, it should let you know that the program is funded by a $600,000 grant from US EPA that includes public outreach, inventory of properties, property assessments, and cleanup planning. And the grant was awarded last year in May, but the money wasn't available until October 1st. The good news is that it's a 3-year grant, so it runs until September of 2024. And the cities that are eligible to participate in this include Pinetop-Lakeside, Holbrook, Eager, Springerville, St. John's, and Apache County is also on the list. Fortunately, this is 100% grant funded, so none of the cities had to put up any money or do any matching in order to get these funds. And both publicly owned and privately owned property are eligible for use of this grant. Most importantly, this is not an enforcement program. This is one of the only EPA programs that I know of where there is no enforcement. So what happens is when people who own property want to get an assessment with this grant, there is no phone call, there is no follow-up knock on the door, there's not a letter that says, you use this money, now you need to take whatever action might be the next logical action. It's entirely up to the property owners to decide what they want to do once they get one of these assessments. The goal is to provide property owners with information, let them make the decision. As far as who is participating in this program, you can see here that most of the city managers for the communities that I mentioned are participating. Here in Pinetop-Lakeside, not only is Keith Johnson participating, but also Jeremiah Lloyd. So we've been fortunate in that regard. And I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. The mayor did mention my name, but I am the consultant to the group. My name's Dave Laney, and I work for a company by the name of Stantec Consulting. So what properties are eligible for use of this grant? They're called brownfields, and a lot of people think that's a problem because brownfields have this negative connotation. They're always contaminated. That's not true. The definition is that brownfields are properties where the reuse, redevelopment, or expansion is complicated due to the presence or perceived presence of contamination. So there's a lot of these properties, probably 70% of the ones that get assessed with this grant, that have no contamination that's of significance. But they have a very unknown or uncertain history. It's not well documented what they may have been 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. And so developers and investors and buyers are scared of these properties because they may have been sitting there for a long time and nobody can remember what they used to be. But with this grant, all of that prior history can be documented. And a lot of times if there's nothing in the past that's an issue, then properties that have been stuck for many, many years can move forward and something can be done with them. These are what traditional brownfields look like, old gas stations, dry cleaners, things like that. But we find with this particular grant that a lot of schools, a lot of churches, even health clinics and hospitals have used the grant funding. We've even done strip malls and shopping centers and things like that that maybe have been closed due to lack of business. People often ask, what makes a brownfield? Well, it varies quite a bit. If jobs go overseas, there might be a big manufacturing facility that's sitting vacant. Nobody can use that building because it was customized for the business that used to have it. But in northern Arizona, there's also things like the interstate freeway system that came in and replaced Route 66. Route 66 used to go through downtown of a lot of cities in northern Arizona. So everybody had to drive past gas stations, restaurants, hotels. But when the interstate system came in, people could bypass a lot of the towns in northern Arizona, and hundreds of brownfields were created overnight. So there are a lot of cities, north of you that have that problem. The thing about brownfields is that they're sitting there, they're not generating taxes, they're not creating jobs. The studies show that they tend to encourage crime, graffiti. In larger cities, they encourage gang activity. And in even some of the cities here, they have had problems with arson because kids and other folks who have a lot of time on their hands will torch some of these properties if they've been sitting there long enough. So it can be a real issue for cities that have very many of these brownfields. On the other hand, if you get these redeveloped, you do generate tax revenue, you do create jobs, and you also instill a sense of civic pride and improve quality of life for folks that are living around the brownfields. Some success stories with brownfields here in Arizona include a health clinic that is in Williams. There was originally a hospital that was built in the 50s. The hospital district there had North Country Healthcare go in and run a clinic out of the old hospital building. But the problem was that there was some asbestos in the building, so North Country said, we're only going to use about 2/3 of the building. We're just going to shut up the back third of the building and not use it at all. Eventually, there was one of these brownfield grants that City of Flagstaff had, and the Williams Hospital District was able to get an asbestos survey done, so they had a really good idea of how much asbestos was there. And then they talked to Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and got a $50,000 grant to remove the asbestos. They ended up, after that, taking the building down and building a brand new health clinic at a cost of $6 million. They could not have done that if they couldn't take down the old building. They didn't have land to put up a new health clinic, and they certainly didn't have money to take the asbestos out. The reason they could spend the $6 million was because they'd been collecting a fee every year from the people who lived in Williams, but it could only be used for construction and operation. It could not be used for cleanup. So the Brownfield grant actually made this whole project happen. Here's another success story in Flagstaff. There was a site along the railroad in downtown Flagstaff. Was owned and operated by the railroad and a utility about 100 years ago. They needed a place to treat railroad ties and poles that they strung electric line on. So they dug a pit and they fill it with creosote and they treated the wood there. Fast forward to 2010, the city was having a real problem with this property. It's only a 4-acre property, but it impacted 1,500 properties in downtown Flagstaff because it's right next to the Rio de Flag, and the city could not channelize that. The Rio de Flag could not do flood control there, and so those 1,500 properties had to buy flood insurance every year. Fortunately, they were able to use Brownfield grant funding from EPA. They removed that creosote pit, and now they're going to take down this building, which is an old warehouse, and put up a bus terminal. It's going to be mixed use, so there'll be shops and residential units in it as well. And they will be doing channelization on the rear of the flag. And because they were able to spend about $150,000 from EPA, they now qualify for $155 million of federal grant money to develop this property. But it all happened because there were EPA Brownfield grant funds available. And then the last property I want to talk to you about is in St. John's. This is an old automobile dealership, operated for many years. At one point it closed, and the building was no longer being used, but there were underground storage tanks there. About the same time that it closed, the city determined that the building that they were using for City Hall was no longer usable. So they worked with Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, who had EPA Brownfield grant funding, and Arizona Department of Environmental Quality removed the underground storage tanks, removed some contaminated soil, and then the city got a loan and renovated the entire interior of the building and now uses it as City Hall. So it was a win-win for everyone. As far as what kinds of work can be done with this grant, the first thing that we typically do is to conduct a Brownfield Inventory. And there was one that was completed for this grant in May of this year. What we typically do with a Brownfield Inventory is we go and we get publicly available information from EPA and the state about properties that may have had some environmental work in the past, including old gas stations that did have underground storage tanks. We also look for vacant and underutilized properties. We look at tax delinquent properties. We get information from the county assessor on ownership and zoning. And we work with communities to look at areas where they have older buildings to see where brownfields might be located. And here are the results of the inventory that we did. You can see there was something like 145 potential brownfield properties in the 5 communities that are part of this coalition. About half of those were considered priority properties by the communities that were in the coalition. And it runs the range in terms of property type from, as I said, gas stations, auto repair facilities, old buildings, and in some cases just vacant property. But they all were, in their own way, an impediment to the communities who wanted to do something better with those properties and wanted to encourage property owners to do something different. Here's what some of the properties in Holbrook look like. There's, 3 or 4 gas stations on this picture. There's an old motel. There's a business that's about 40 or 50 years old that's right at the main intersection of the 2 main roads in Holbrook. Here are some of the sites in Pinetop-Lakeside that were identified with the inventory. You probably recognize a few of these. There are 2 gas stations. There's the old Earl's Dry Cleaner. There's one gas station that's on here that, so the 3rd gas station is actually being used by, I can't think of the name of the business. They do windshield repair. You guys probably know where they are. I don't think there's anything there from the old gas station that's causing them an issue. But with this grant, if they wanted, we could go and we could look to see if there's still underground storage tanks, and they could get them removed for free, even though they're not disrupting their business at all. In the long run, if they ever decide to sell that property or want to do any future development on there, that could be an issue for them, and they can get it taken care of at no cost to themselves. Because obviously, being a glass repair business, they were not an owner and operator of the gas station. There's also community outreach and engagement that gets done with these grants. Apache County has a website up right now, or a web page on their website that talks about the grant. So does Holbrook. We're offering this to every city in the coalition, every community that wants one of these. We can put up a page that talks about the grant so that property owners get information about it. There are also fact sheets that have been developed. There's some information on the success stories that I mentioned. And some of that was submitted to you all before tonight's meeting. So if you're interested in looking at that, you should have it available to you. Over the next 3 years, we will be conducting some public meetings also in some of these communities. We're required by EPA to have a couple public meetings in each community per year. This counts as one, even though I'd like, at some point to go and invite property owners and folks that can benefit from this grant to attend a different meeting. This is a good start. And there's also a Brownfield Advisory Committee, which I'm not really going to talk about tonight, but be more than happy if you have questions about who's on that committee and what they do to talk a little bit about that when I get done. Once the word gets out to property owners and to the public about the grant, if someone does have a property, what they do is they fill out one of these site nomination forms. It's just a 2-page form. Asks some very basic information. What's the address? Who's the owner? What's the property currently being used for? What is the future use of the property? And what's the schedule for doing something different with the property? We can oftentimes expedite an assessment for these properties. If somebody has a developer or an investor or a bank loan that's pending, we can definitely get EPA to move on approving an assessment for those properties pretty quickly. And that leads me to this slide, which talks about what the process is for approval. There's actually 2 different types of properties. There's what EPA calls hazardous materials properties. Those are properties that might have asbestos or lead-based paint or something like that. Then there are petroleum, and those are the ones that are reviewed and approved by EPA. Then there are petroleum sites, old gas stations, auto repair facilities, and those go to ADEQ to review and approve them as eligible. Really, the only thing that keeps people from being able to use this once they apply is if they were the owner-operator of the property. So you won't see the major gas station, oil companies who owned and operated a gas station coming into EPA and saying, we want a free assessment with this money. But say somebody, a mom and pop buys it, wants to turn it into a coffee shop or a gift store or something like that, they would definitely qualify because they weren't an owner-operator and they weren't responsible for any contamination that might be there. The types of assessments that get done, there are 3 main types. We do phase 1 environmental site assessments where we look at the history of the property, we interview the property owner, we look at historical air photos, and we see if there's what's called a recognized environmental condition, which means there was a release of something there, some type of contaminant. That costs between $3,000 and $5,000 to do one of those and takes between 1 and 2 months. If there is a recognized environmental condition, the property owner can get a phase 2 where we go out and we collect samples and we send it to the lab. Both the phase 1 and the phase 2 don't cost them anything. It's 100% paid for by the grant. And when you're talking about a phase 2, those can be $25,000 and up. So you're talking about some real money here for that these property owners would have to put out themselves. They would have to come out of their pocket if they wanted to sell the property, they wanted to develop the property, or they wanted a bank loan. The banks will ask for these phase 1's environmental site assessments before they will loan money. So it's something that property owners are going to need anyway that they would have to pay for under ordinary circumstances. But with the grant, they don't have to do that. The grant will pay for it. And then the third thing that we do in the way of assessments are hazardous building materials surveys, where we look for asbestos and lead-based paint in buildings. Those are typically buildings that were built 1980 or before. If a property owner gets an assessment and they want to, and say they do want to clean up, but they want to know how much would it cost, we can provide cost estimates for them, and we typically provide at least 3 from 3 different contractors using 3 different methodologies, so that the property owner has a variety of options to choose from. We also have a planner on staff who does redevelopment planning, so he can help property owners if they're interested in doing landscaping on their property, or they need some help with the facade on a building or signage or what have you. We have a really good planner who does that a lot and has actually facilitated the resale of a number of brownfield properties that were stuck previously, but because he came up with a plan and the property owner was able to use that in marketing their property, the property actually sold fairly quickly. And we're talking, I'm thinking specifically about Cochise County, where there's another one of these grants that I work on. These were properties that were, 3-story hospital buildings that got sold for $600,000 and are now being turned into affordable housing. Also, the old high school in Bisbee was one that the county owned that's being sold for affordable housing. They got $900,000 after one of the regulated building materials surveys was done and one of these site reuse plans by my planner was done. So it's not an insignificant thing by any means. The last thing that is available with this grant is what's called Areawide Planning. Some cities have older areas or old infrastructure that is impeding development. With this grant, if a community wants to know what would it take to upgrade water, sewer, electric, they can get a study paid for with this grant. Also, if they want a market analysis that shows what they need to do to attract certain kinds of business, attract and retain business, we have economists who can do those kinds of studies. And again, it's 100% paid for with the grant. The cities and the towns don't pay anything. One question that's often asked is, what about cleanup? Will this pay for cleanup? This is an assessment grant, so it doesn't pay for cleanup. However, ADEQ follows up very closely after we do these assessments with the property owners. And particularly in the case of cities and nonprofits, they have regularly been providing cleanup dollars. I would say that in an average year, ADEQ probably spends probably $200,000 for each one of these grants for cleanup. And there's a lot of property owners that wouldn't sign up for an assessment unless they were assured that there was some cleanup dollars, and I don't blame them. But fortunately, ADQ has been a really good partner with us on this. So there is that. Also, if a property were to be owned by a city and it needed cleanup, EPA has cleanup grants of up to $2 million per site that are available. So just to wrap this up, I want to make it clear that when we have seen this grant be most successful, it's when there's a collective effort by a community to let property owners know about it. It also involves participation by realtors, bankers, developers. It's not one of those things where I can come and talk to you and the next day, we have a dozen people sign up for this. What it really takes is it takes you guys to talk to people that you know who might have property, or even people that may not have property but know somebody, because through word of mouth, we get a lot of people who come in and say, hey, I wasn't at that meeting, but I heard about this grant and I want to sign up. So that's the way that it typically works. About 80% of the properties get nominated and get an assessment because of word of mouth. Only about 20% because of our inventory that I talked about earlier. But the good news is that if you get brownfields that are cleaned up and redeveloped, it can improve places where we all live, work, and play. It can save taxpayers significant dollars because a lot of brownfields are in inner city areas, downtown areas where there's already infrastructure. So you don't have developers on the edge of town that are trying to put in new development and asking a city or a town to help fund a bill to put in new water lines or sewer lines or electric or something like that. It's all already there, so it saves taxpayers money. And one of the nice things is that EPA has been collecting data on these properties and these kinds of grants for 20 years now. And they have been able to show that for every $1 of grant money that gets invested, $23 of private investment on average comes in to each brownfield site. And property values go up by 5 to 15%, not just in the brownfield, but for areas that are up to 4 blocks away from the brownfields. So it's really a good economic tool that not every city uses, but then a lot of cities don't have access to this grant. It's a nationally competitive situation, and EPA only awards about 1 out of every 3 grants that are applied for every year. But fortunately, you guys have access to this for the next 2.5, 3 years, and hopefully you'll take advantage of it. So that's all I've got. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Dave? Councilor Krigbaum?
I'm wondering, in the list that was Pinetop-Lakeside, there were quite a few properties. Do those property owners already know about this, or is this that the city has decided to include those properties?
The property owners are going to be informed that the grant is available. Yes.
But they don't know yet.
They do
And
not know
so they were not invited to this meeting or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
But the potential is greater for other properties as well. It's not limited to the ones you inventoried,
That's correct.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
The next step then will be to start some public meetings and work with Jeremiah, I'm assuming?
That's
And-
correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, Holbrook is, I had a similar presentation that I gave to the Holbrook City Council, and then their Chamber of Commerce shortly after that decided to hold what they call a roundtable, where it's not just a regular meeting, but they actually bring in folks to sit around the table, as it sounds, and discuss it. And that's coming up in a week or two. And I think that's really, the way that things get done a lot of times is for folks to talk about issues that, are bothering them, talk about their property and what kinds of difficulties they may have had selling it or developing it, and see if we can help them out. A lot of times they get the assessment and then they get funding from places that are totally unrelated to any of the assessment work that we've done, just because somebody now knows about their property and comes and helps them, puts a new roof on if they're a nonprofit, does something to help with the project that the property owner wants to do. I won't say that happens in every case, but I have seen it happen, for sure.
And the total pot of money is $600,000 for this whole region?
Yes.
So this could probably be potentially really helpful for our downtown areas that we had talked about previously at another retreat. We would like to urge towards redevelopment, so this could be really helpful.
Yes,
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I
Vice
had
Mayor?
one. Can a tenant qualify if they have a long-term lease?
That's a good question. I don't know that we've had that many tenants that have applied for use of this grant. I know that EPA frequently surprises me as far as approving things that I would not have thought would have been eligible. So What I would say is if there's somebody who is interested, who's a tenant, who's interested in trying to access this grant, that they talk to me and I'll fill out the paperwork and we can see. I mean, it doesn't cost them anything to apply, and there's nothing that EPA keeps if they say to somebody you're not eligible. It does not go in the record. Basically, it's just something that, you know, we tried it, it didn't work. End of story. And a lot of times EPA will suggest for properties that aren't eligible, they'll find another way to actually fund them. One of these grants is currently being run by Northern Arizona Council of Governments, and I'm working for them. Coconino County had an old courthouse that they, I think, built in 18 something, late 1800s. And they wanted some asbestos surveys done, and they wanted asbestos abatement. And initially EPA said, well, you've owned it all these years. If there's asbestos there, who put the asbestos there if it wasn't the county? So they said, you don't qualify for this particular grant. But they went to the state of Arizona. ADEQ said, we will apply on your behalf. EPA gave ADEQ the money. ADEQ did all the work that the county wanted. And everybody was happy. It happened. It just didn't happen the first time around. And all the money came through within a matter of just a couple months after the initial decision was made that the county wasn't eligible, using the first approach that everybody thought should be used.
Anything else? Councilor Schnitzer?
Just a comment. We were doing some work at the Nature Center, and we discovered a tank down in the ground that we're not sure what's in it, an old concrete tank. And Matt Patterson then told us about the Brownfields project, and we've sent in an application. So we're just waiting to see if we can get somebody to find out even what it is. And then if we need remediation, help us do it.
The one thing about tanks, which EPA won't write down, but they will tell you if you ask them, is the only way to tell if a tank is leaking, if it had something in it at one time, is to take it out. And so even though this is an assessment grant, and I said it doesn't pay for cleanup, they'll actually let you pull the tank and they'll pay for a contractor to take it out so that a sample can be collected underneath that. And 9 times out of 10, if it's an old tank, it's metal. And so you can get a scrap metal dealer to actually pay money and haul it off.
No, this one's concrete, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, who knows? Maybe somebody wants to grind it up and use it as road base or something.
Septic tank.
Councilor
Well,
Watson?
it's we think a settling tank for a washdown area for equipment. So it has some oil in it, but we're not sure if it's a gallon or 500 gallons.
Councilor Watson?
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. For the Phase 1 and Phase 2 assessments, is there a maximum dollar amount that they can apply for?
EPA won't let you spend more than $200,000 on one site, so that's the maximum.
And then looking at Stantec, looks like it's a firm of planners, engineers, scientists. Are you contracted with APA for funding for you to come do this and to help?
Yeah, we do the assessments as part of this. We're actually contracted with Apache County, who is the
Agent?
the grantee of record. But what happened was every city that's part of this coalition, every community had to sign a memorandum of agreement with Apache County. So essentially every community is the grantee in a way. They're all the communities have to do meet the same requirements that Apache County has to meet. But we do have a contract with Apache County to provide assessments for all the communities.
Okay.
And all the property owners in every community, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments for Dave? Okay, thank you for presenting this to us. I think it was great information. I'm sure Jeremiah will keep us apprised of any activity going forward. Okay, thanks for being here. Okay, we're going to move on then to item D2, which is a public hearing for FY 2022-23 budget, and consider resolution number 22-1629, adoption of the final budget for the town of Pinetop-Lakeside, Arizona for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2023. Kevin?
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. What we have for your review and consideration tonight is the final budget. And after the public hearing, we will ask you to adopt it. On July 14th, you all did approve and adopt our tentative budget. That budget was just under $24 million, which was $23,912,287. What we bring for your consideration tonight, there are no changes from that budget. A quick summary of what makes up that just under $24 million is $8,446,000 for general fund. Our special revenue funds are $10,670,000. There are 6 funds in our special revenue fund makeup. That's our streets, tourism and promotion, parks, development impact fees, grants, and a very small amount in our acquisition and development fund, $10,000 of carryover. So that's what makes up our special revenue funds there listed. Our capital projects fund, we have $4.5 million. As you all know, that includes our debt payments on our bonds, as well as the police department construction and other fixed assets we'll buy, equipment and vehicles and such. Our enterprise fund is our solid waste collection fund, and we have budgeted there $265,000, and that's what makes up the just under $24 million that we're asking for your approval tonight.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. This is a public hearing. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address us on this? Come on up. Please introduce yourself.
Kevin, I was just curious, were there any noticeable changes from the proposed budget to tonight?
No, there are no changes actually between that tentative budget and tonight's budget.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Anybody else? Okay, then the public hearing is closed. Council, any questions, comments, discussion on this? Councilor Kriegbaum, you look like you're ready to say something.
I'm ready to make a motion if you're
Go right
ready for it. I move to adopt resolution number 22-1629, adopting the final budget for the town of Pinetop-Lakeside for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Watson. It's been moved and seconded to approve the budget. Is there further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Thank you. That carries unanimously. Kevin, thank you for all your work on this. All the department heads as well, but especially Kevin. I know he bore the brunt of it.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on then to item D3. Pursuant to ARS 38-431-03A1, the council may vote to enter into executive session. For A, upon a public majority vote of the members constituting a quorum, a public body may hold an executive session for the following purpose. 1, discussion or consideration of employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, demotion, dismissal, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of a public officer, appointee, or employee. The employee may demand that the discussion or consideration occur at a public meeting. Public body shall provide the officer, appointee, or employee with written notice of the executive session as appropriate, but not less than 24 hours. For the officer, appointee, its employee to determine whether the discussion or consideration should occur at a public hearing. So tonight we are going to discuss the performance evaluation of our town manager. I would entertain a motion. Councilor Snitzer.
Mayor, I move that we enter into executive session for the reasons stated in the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to enter executive session. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Thank you. That carries unanimously. We will go into executive session and return for item D4 on our agenda after our conversation. Thank you.